The desert can play tricks on a man. Heat shimmers like smoke, silence presses against the ears, and sometimes the ordinary looks just a little too strange. That's what Caleb Torrin thought when he saw it. A sack lying in the middle of a lonely dirt road. At first it seemed like nothing more than a bundle of grain fallen from a wagon. But then, it moved. He reined in his horse, dust swirling in the burning air, and for a moment he wondered if his tired eyes were lying to him. The sack shifted again, and this time he heard it. A muffled sound, weak, fragile, almost human. He crouched low, loosened the rope with calloused hand, and then froze. Because from inside that sack came one word, whispered so faint it barely belonged to this world. Mama. If that moment just gave you chills, you're not alone. Stories like this remind us that the Wild West wasn't only about shootouts and cattle drives. It was about choices, about courage, and about humanity. So if you want more true-feeling Western tales that carry both grit and heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who loves a good twist of fate. Now let's right into the chapters.
The sun was high, the kind of sun that burns through hats and leather coats alike. Caleb Torrin had ridden this stretch of desert road 100 times, but that afternoon, something stopped him cold. A burlap sack lay in the dirt ahead. At first glance, it looked like grain, maybe feed fallen from a wagon. But as he reined in his horse, dust swirling around the hooves, he saw it shift. Slowly, almost like it was alive. Caleb dismounted with the kind of caution only a man who'd seen too much trouble could manage. He stepped forward, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The sack moved again, a faint, desperate rustle, and then a sound. Not the squeak of an animal, not the hiss of a snake, but a voice. Weak, fragile, barely a whisper. Mama. Caleb froze, his hand resting on his revolver though he knew no weapon could help him. He leaned closer, fingers working at the crude knots. His weathered hands shook, and that wasn't something Caleb Torrin was known for. What he found inside that sack would test every choice he thought he'd already made in life. The rope slipped free, and the sack fell open. What Caleb saw made his chest tighten in a way no bullet or blade ever had. A little girl, no older than 6, curled into herself like a frightened animal. Her dress was torn, her small hands trembling. Dust streaked her cheeks, and her lips were cracked from thirst. But it was her eyes that struck him hardest. Wide, dark, terrified, and yet, somewhere deep inside, still defiant. She whispered again, Mema, her voice so faint it almost broke on the wind. Caleb dropped to one knee. He'd seen men hang. He'd watched towns burn. He'd buried friends whose names he couldn't forget. But this was different. This was innocence, abandoned in the desert like trash. He reached for his canteen, holding it steady as she took small, shaky sips. Her eyes never left his face, as if trying to decide whether he was savior or threat. What's your name, little one? He asked quietly. Anna, she whispered. And then, with hope so raw it cut deeper than any knife, where's my Mema? Caleb's jaw clenched. Some answers were too cruel to speak aloud, but Caleb's ears caught it before his eyes did. The distant thundering of hooves. He looked up sharply. On the horizon, a dust cloud rose against the blistering sky. Riders. And they were coming fast. He glanced at Anna, still clutching his sleeve with her tiny hand. Whoever left her out here wouldn't be happy to see her alive. And if those riders weren't the guilty men, then townsfolk might see only one thing. A cowboy harboring an Apache child in a land already torn with fear and hatred. Hold on, Caleb muttered, scooping her into his arms. She was far too light, her small frame all bones beneath ragged cloth. Swinging into the saddle, he set her in front of him, her heartbeat fluttering against his chest. The riders drew closer. 4, maybe 5 men. Caleb spurred his horse off the road, cutting toward rocky outcroppings that might hide them. Behind, the sound of pursuit grew louder, echoing across the desert like rolling thunder before a storm. Every instinct told him to leave her, to let fate decide. But his grip only tightened on the reins. He'd made his choice. There was no turning back now. They found shelter in a narrow crack of rock, barely a cave, but enough to hide them from searching eyes. Caleb set Anna down gently, his pistol always close at hand. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. the men spreading out, combing the desert. Why did you help me? Anna's small voice trembled in the shadows. Caleb studied her face, features caught between two worlds, Apache and white. In this territory, that alone was a death sentence. Because leaving you there wasn't right, he said simply. Her eyes glistened. She pressed closer, whispering words that froze his blood. They killed Mama. Tears streaked down her dirt-stained cheeks. They said she was a traitor for loving Papa. They said I was a mistake. The fury that surged in Caleb was hot and sharp. He'd fought in range wars, seen cruelty firsthand. But this, men who murdered a woman and tied her child in a sack, that was cowardice wrapped in hate. Outside, voices carried through the canyon. One name cut through the air, Dutch Morrison. A vigilante leader. A man Caleb knew and despised. The men hunting them weren't strangers. They were killers Anna already knew. The riders scoured the desert, their voices drifting closer, then fading. By some miracle, the cave held its secret. But Caleb knew luck wouldn't last. Anna clutched something from her torn dress, a small leather journal. Mama gave me this, she whispered. Caleb opened it carefully. Inside were poems, desert wisdom, and one line written in a mother's hand. For Anna, my brave girl. Your story is just beginning. It hit him like a bullet. This child had lost everything, yet she carried hope pressed between fragile pages. Caleb's chest tightened. He'd seen too many graves, too many endings. Maybe, just once, he could guard a beginning. Over the days that followed, Caleb led Anna toward safety, through missions and long trails west. She gave him a polished stone with a carved symbol. Mama said it means protector, she told him softly. Years later, when people asked Caleb about his bravest moment, he didn't speak of battles or duels. He spoke of a sack in the dust, a whisper of Mama, and the choice to save a child no one else would. Because sometimes, the greatest legend of the West wasn't about guns. It was about mercy. And that, friends, is the story of a cowboy who stopped for a sack in the date and found a reason to believe in mercy again. Caleb Toran didn't ride away that day. He chose to carry the weight of another soul, and in doing so, he rewrote not only Anna's future, but his own. It's a reminder that the Wild West wasn't only about outlaws, guns, and cattle drives. It was about choices, about humanity, about the small, unseen acts of courage that shaped lives far beyond the desert. So when you think of legends, don't just picture jewels at high noon. Picture a man kneeling in the dust, loosening a rope, and hearing a single fragile word, Mema. If this story touched you, saddle up with us again. Like, subscribe, and share, because more tales of grit and heart are waiting on the trail ahead.